There was a lot of talk after the vice presidential debate about the Minnesota abortion law that J.D. Vance tried to pin Tim Walz down on, where you obviously had J.D. Vance make the charge that Minnesota allows for children, babies, to be killed outside the womb after they are delivered and are born alive. And Tim Walz said that's not true, but didn't really offer much specific. So this came up in a very heated conversation after the debate on CNN.
Credit for solicitude. Look, the policies, maybe not.
I just had this thing in Minnesota. There were 8 deaths among infants who survived abortion attempts during Tim Walz's tenure as governor. It happened. They don't want to talk about the fact that it happened. But there were children.
What's the source of
what first of all, let me ask you a question. Since you've deeply researched this, what were the condition of these babies when they were born? What was the participation of the family?
They tried to abort the babies, and they survived the abortion, and then they died.
And you think that families casually tossed them aside?
No, I think.
Tell me what their condition was.
Tim Walz
could they have
the
survived?
truth about it
Was it a case of families not wanting children to suffer who were, when they were told that they are doomed?
Yes. Yeah.
That
is the reality of the case.
That seems important to me.
Here's what I will say. Keep talking about that, because when you all talk about abortion like this, it is when women and that gender gap continues to divide, not in your favor. Because women, it is disrespectful to pretend like women are making choices about abortion. That is the intent to just let a baby die at 9 months. Let me finish it here. And it is dishonest for J.D. Vance to go up there and try and push that narrative. And that is what I'm saying when I said he presented well, but his policies and what he was saying was not truthful. It just wasn't. And that is why the overwhelming American people, since Roe has been overturned, you guys are not winning. You are not winning. And if you run on this issue, you will not win in November.
They're not running on this issue.
They're lying on this issue.
They're running on, it's up to the states, and they're running on Donald Trump's moderate position of some reasonable restrictions, rape, incest, and life of the mother, IVF.
Okay, so they're trying not to run on the issue, but the Democrats are kind of forcing them into these very awkward spots. And what that woman said there is absolutely true. The more the Republicans talk this shit, the more that gender gap widens. And the reason why this issue is as powerful as it is because it drives a wedge right through the very constituency that decides who wins and loses most races. A very reliable voting bloc of PMC, affluent, suburban women who could go either way, right? And that's why this is such a killer issue for Republicans, because the way they talk about this and the laws they have passed around this in states where they have been empowered to do so, which include the not so deep red states anymore of Georgia and North Carolina, there is a major backlash amongst the very group of voters that neither party can really afford to turn off. That's why, despite Kamala's tanking numbers with black voters, Latino voters, Arab voters, union voters, that's why they're in the game, because issues like this keep Democrats afloat, because they drive turnout in the suburbs. And not only do they drive turnout in the suburbs, they shrink Republican margins in the rural areas. Those rural areas, which used to come in 75-25 for the GOP, they're coming in 60-30 for the GOP, which is allowing Democrats to make up those deficits in the cities.
Right.
And so that's why this is such a powerful thing, because what she says there is absolutely true about how this plays to the average voter. When the average voter hears Tim Walz tell stories about how, women could not get care because they were having a miscarriage and the doctor wouldn't treat the woman because the doctor didn't know what the legality of that treatment was going to be. If it was determined that that baby was viable and the doctor didn't do everything they could to save it, but rather treated the patient with the health of the mother first in mind, what, now they're going to be criminally liable? Like, this creates so many problems for people in such personal ways. And the way that the Republicans talk about this and legislate around this, it alienates the very constituency that neither party can afford to alienate.
Yeah, this is deadly for them. Unlike, and we've already seen this in previous elections, and it's another reason why we were talking in a previous segment. Why are the Democrats even running even with all of the people that the Republicans are picking off, with
Right.
their unusual support among black voters, with their unusual support among Latinos? The conventional wisdom has always been that Democrats can't win if they just peel off a few percentage points of black voters. So why are they running even? Because of things like this. Because
Right.
the normie voters are not going to vote Republican. There is such an overwhelming number of typical voters, and those people vote. Those normies vote. They do not miss a presidential election.
Right.
They have outsized influence on outcomes of elections. They are running into the Democratic Party, even if they may be conservative, because of shit like this. You're not just talking abortion. Very much like, I believe, part of what has stimulated the insane gender stuff on the other side is, well, once they passed gay marriage, they needed a new thing. A lot of these organizations make their living ginning up outrage and making claims about discrimination. So they had to push into areas that people would still find offensive even after they've liberalized around these issues generally. They had to go more to the margins. That's what's happening on the other side. That's why you got a VP candidate talking about banning IVF. Because once Dobbs came down, they had to push to another extreme. And it's put them in a position where they are completely repulsive to any kind of normal person in the country. Most people, even Republicans, do not, but forget about the IVF, they don't agree with their abortion position.
Right.
And now it's hung around their neck. Before, people who just wanted their tax cuts could write it off because you had Roe. Let them talk.
Right.
Now that it's not a matter of that, does anybody believe that Trump's not just going to give them whatever they want? He just came out. He's trying to manage the perception now. He said he would veto an anti-abortion bill that came to his desk. Does anyone believe that? I don't personally believe that. I don't think he gives a shit. I don't think he's actually pro-life. I think he's pro whoever's around him. And the people around him are going to tell him not to do that. And I don't think he'll do it. Like, there is a real chance if they had. Look, I don't think they'll have the Senate and Congress. But if they did, would they go for an abortion ban? Probably.
Well, what I would say is, yes, I mean, I would second that, but I would also say that there is another element to this, which is just the emotional backlash that this generates against the Republican Party when Republicans, especially Republican men, talk about an issue, especially an issue like this, where you're talking about born alive babies being killed, because the image that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are trying to create in the minds of voters is that an open-legged whore goes, into the hospital and they realize, okay, I don't want this baby 7 months in. Yeah. And so they get it sucked out of them and it's alive when it's sucked out of them and then they kill it. And the woman goes on about her day. That is the image that they want to create in the mind of the average voter. It's demonizing not only the doctors who perform the services, but the women themselves. When the reality of these very, very rare cases is actually tragic. It's actually a tragic situation that women find themselves in where this even becomes an issue, right? And so, case in point, an article came out. Minnesota's new abortion law was the center of the VP debate. So what does it say? So what is the truth of this? Because one thing I will say is that Tim Walz botched this. Tim Walz could have said what's in this article and what's in a video that I'll show you in a few minutes. Instead, he just brushed it aside. Well, that was fact-checked in the last debate. He didn't have these answers ready, which as governor of the fucking state, you should have those answers ready about a bill that you signed, that you knew was going to come up.
Especially you're debating Vance.
You're debating J.D. Vance. You know this issue is going to come up. You're running for vice president, all right? So how could you not be, prepared with this answer Again, none of this is an endorsement of Tim Walz, and this is why. The guy's a fucking idiot. He couldn't just answer this. So in a forum last week at the Rochester Public Library, Representative Dwayne Quam of Byron claimed that changes to the state's abortion law allowed an infant who survives an abortion to be set aside to die. The statement was met with disbelief from an audience member and his DFL challenger. But the Byron Republican claimed that harrowing possibility now exists because of changes to a decades-old abortion law. But what was that change? The statute's old language had required that responsible medical personnel take all reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant. The legislation swapped the phrase preserve the life and health of the born alive infant for a new requirement that called on medical professionals to, quote, care for the infant who is born alive. So they changed it from a more specific form of care, which is life preservation, to just a general care, because a lot of babies who undergo this very, very tragic procedure are non-viable babies who cannot be kept alive for a long period of time once they come out of their mothers. And so in many cases, the doctors and the parents feel it's better for both the child and the mother to let the mother bond with the child for a few minutes or a few hours before they die, as opposed to rush the baby away to try and save its life when it's really not at all reasonable to do so, because the baby is just not able to live outside the womb. So once again, you're talking about a nightmare for a parent, a nightmare for a family, a nightmare for a doctor. It's the complete opposite situation that Trump says, well, they take the baby out and they kill it because the woman doesn't care, right? And this is why this creates such emotional backlash, because when women hear this, they think, well, fuck you. Like, how dare you talk about us in this way, right? To Quam, the change meant a lower standard of care, that a baby who survived an abortion can now be denied life-saving measures. What's more, he argued, the same 2023 Minnesota law got rid of a reporting requirement that obligated the state to produce a report stating the number of babies born after an attempted abortion and what happened to them. They removed that language that required that if a child survives an abortion, you must give appropriate care to help them survive, Quam said, and they went farther by removing the requirement for collecting the data. Heather Holmes, Quam's DFL challenger to represent the House District 24A, this is in the state of Minnesota, obviously, called Quam's criticisms blatantly false and misleading. The vast majority of women who lose their pregnancies at a late stage aren't seeking abortions. They are planning for a new life by painting a nursery, buying a crib, and picking out a name for the baby in hopeful expectancy. What does the bill mean? DFL Representative Tina Liebling, the bill's principal sponsor, calls the GOP interpretation of the changes a scare tactic, a flat-out lie. She says the obligation of a doctor to an infant born alive is no different from his responsibilities towards a patient who has undergone surgery. There is nothing spelled out in a statute about a doctor's responsibilities towards such a patient, and the reason the law is silent on the matter is because it's viewed as part of a doctor's job, their ethical code. The same holds true for an infant who is born alive. Doctors and hospitals have legal and ethical obligations toward their patients that an infant born alive has the rights and protections of other people, Liebling said. We don't have to dictate what the standard of care should be because it's already clear. In the House debate over the legislation in January 2023, Liebling told lawmakers that the change in language from preserve to care was to avoid tragic situations such as when an infant is delivered with a fatal defect and a doctor feels compelled to provide aggressive care regardless of the parent's wishes. So yes, what they're saying here makes perfect sense, which is that it's already in the doctor's ethical code that if a baby is born that has a reasonable chance of survival, the doctor then has an obligation to preserve the life of the baby. Right. What this law does is it gives doctors the judgment to determine if there's no reasonable chance of prolonging this baby's life, we can opt for comfort care instead. That's a decision that you really want to empower doctors to make, because when the state makes that decision for doctors, that's how you get in situations where women with miscarriages can't get health care because the doctor doesn't feel like they can use their best judgment. They feel like if they judge the wrong way, the state will prosecute them. Such scenarios could only compound the pain of loss. Instead of allowing parents a few moments of comfort with their child who may only have a few hours to live, a medical professional was compelled under the old law to intervene to keep the infant alive, whether or not the parents want that, and regardless of the pain it might inflict on the child. Liebling said the word care should be interpreted broadly. Whether a decision is made to take extraordinary measures to prolong the life of the child or measures to be taken to provide comfort care or letting the parents hold their infants for a few minutes as it dies is a private decision best left between parents and their doctors. The old law confused the matter, and the new law removed politicians from the equation. GOP Representative Jeff Backer of Browns Valley, an opponent of the bill, fretted about the implications of comfort care and found the changes to the language inadequate and worrisome. An emergency medical technician, Backer recalled vainly trying to save the life of a baby 21 weeks into gestation in the back of an ambulance. He argued that if he had given comfort care as he understood the phrase to mean the infant born in the back of the ambulance, it was tantamount to murder. Okay, so Care 11, which is, I guess, a local Minnesota news channel, did a brief report on this, which I'll show in case this ties up any loose ends for you.
The old law read, a born alive infant as a result of an abortion shall be fully recognized as a human person and be accorded immediate protection under the law. All reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice shall be taken by responsible medical personnel to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant. The new law removes any reference to abortion and just refers to an infant born alive. It removes the word preserve the life and health of the born alive infant and adds the words care for the infant who is born alive.
We changed the law to be appropriate so that all children who are born access medical care that's appropriate for them. And for some of these families, the appropriate medical care is palliative care for their dying baby.
The old law required the health department to issue a born alive report, like this one in 2021, showing 5 infants born alive in abortions that didn't survive. But the Medical Association tells us it's highly unlikely they could have been saved.
In that case, the induction of childbirth is the method of abortion. It is the method of terminating a pregnancy. And so in those cases, an infant being born alive is the goal. That's the point. And they hold and spend time with that child before it passes away.
Now, the changes to the Born Alive law were made as part of the health bill in 2023. And again, the reason Democrats thought the old language was unnecessary was because doctors are already obligated to save lives. They thought the language in that law created a false impression that these are elective abortions of otherwise healthy babies that are not being cared for.
So that should clear it up for you, I think. They're not elective abortions. First of all, they're extremely rare. 5 of these happened in 2021. What did this guy cite, the CNN guy here? He cited 8. 8 babies died throughout Walz's entire tenure as governor of the state. So you're talking about an extremely rare and extremely tragic situation that is traumatic for mothers and I would imagine doctors to go through. And you're trying to paint this as this widespread problem of loose-legged women casually deciding to murder a baby 7 months into their term. That is offensive to women. That is why women are not voting for you in the numbers you need them to. That is why you're losing the suburbs. And that is why you are in danger of losing perhaps the most winnable election of my lifetime. It's that simple. You have no case here. And every time you try to make a case here, you fucking embarrass yourself. Or worse, you try and smear mothers who have to make the most gutting decision they've ever made in their lives. This is the most gutting decision a mother has to make, is to abort an unviable pregnancy. And you're trying to tar them as whores who just casually wake up one morning and decide, hey, I thought I wanted this baby, but I don't. Let's go kill it. It's really a disgusting thing to do, and they are reaping what they sow on this issue.
This is part of why the argument of Trump as the lesser of two evils is just not holding up for me over time. When you look at things like this, because the Democrats cry wolf so much about culture war stuff that, frankly, in many cases, they're on the wrong side of by most reasonable standards, there's a tendency to go, yeah. No, but this is serious. This is not, your son puts on a dress, so they need to be on puberty blockers. This is for real. This is a legitimate concern. And you don't need to tell me about the hypocrisy of the Democrats and about the fact that they never codified Roe v. Wade when they could have because they wanted to fundraise on it.
Absolutely.
Yes, but their position is not an anti-abortion position. The position of this party, the official position of this party, is this demonizing women who aren't even getting elective abortions, re-traumatizing people who have already suffered the most horrible thing parents can go through. So you're going to look to these people as, yeah, no, say what you will, but Trump said a couple things that suggest that maybe possibly on a Thursday, if the moon is full, he won't be as bad on Ukraine.
Right.
No. And you want to talk, look, I don't throw this around a lot because we know how it's used by the libs. It's a pretty fucking privileged position to say, well, you know what? I don't think they're going to throw me off the internet for misgendering somebody. So I'm going to ignore this. And I'm going to pretend these people are civil libertarians. They're not fucking civil libertarians. Donald Trump, this aside, Donald Trump has said that he wants people to go to jail for flag burning. Donald Trump has said that he wants to deport people who are pro-Palestine out of the country. They are not fucking civil libertarians. There is a certain band of kind of anti-woke things that, sure, they're not censorious about because they agree with that position.
Right.
So they're not going to be censorious about that. They'll be just as censorious about their crazy shit, of which this is a part. So what do you mean lesser of two evils? In what way? In what sense?
Well, also what I would say as it pertains to this issue is even if you take Donald Trump at his word that he would veto a national abortion ban, right? Which, again, he promised to take care. He promised to make sure everyone had health care in 2016 when he ran. Yeah. He promised that. He promised
we're not going to be the best health care anybody's ever seen.
We're not going to have people dying out on the streets. And what happened when the Republicans passed a bill through the House that would have done just that? Donald Trump said, it's a beautiful plan, get it to my desk and I'll sign it. And the only reason that didn't happen is because John McCain turned his thumb down. But Donald Trump was ready to sign whatever they got.
John McCain was dying and he was afraid of hell.
Yeah, right.
That's the only reason that didn't pass.
Exactly. But Trump was ready for all his promises. He was ready to go back on them. And because he's a lazy fuck, he doesn't want to do the work of saying, no, we have to change this, this, and that. He's just a lazy fuck, wants to sit around and say, yeah, get the bill to my desk and I'll sign it. So, yeah, there's no reason to trust that he wouldn't sign whatever gets to his desk. But let's say you do trust that he would veto a national ban. This kind of rhetoric around an issue like this, that's why I showed the video and read the article and showed you the TV report on the law. That kind of rhetoric about an issue that is this serious and this personal to so many people just makes voters hate you to the point where they don't even think whether you'd veto a national ban. They're not even going to get into the weeds of what you would actually do tactically as a politician surrounding the issue. When they hear you talk like that, they fucking hate your guts. They're going to vote against you.
Right.
And this is why the election is as close as it is, because the Democrats are collapsing amongst all of these groups, as we covered at the beginning of the show, that historically vote Democrat: black voters, Arab voters, Latino voters, union voters. But this collapse in the suburbs is so seismic that it's keeping the Democrats in the game. In an election they have no business, much less winning. They have no business being anywhere close in this election. But this is exactly how you lose winnable elections.
Yep.
If you're the Republicans.
Please clap.